Well, my blanket is starting to go away. I'm losing weight.
I got these ace
Right.
It's been 3 or 4 years since I did that.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
No, no. Yeah.
Well, I mean, these makes it. As you said, you with the horse, right? So this little bit of frost isn't anything. Yeah, when I was young, like second grade, we lived in this small town called Seagoville, and it was in the valley. The snow would be like 9, 10, the entire town. And they would just make tunnels. They'd make tunnels to good places.
Crazy thing.
Yeah. I hope we don't have to build any igloos this winter.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep, I'm not a winter fan. I like the summer.
Yeah. Cold all the way out. I got out yesterday. It's about that cutting.
Well, I like in between, but between 28 and 32, 35, even the 30s. I'll choose 100. Yeah.
Have a good week. Yeah. Round week. 35. Pretty chilly out there, I want to tell you. Well, Reed had a pretty long week. Put Randy in the hospital Thursday. Yeah, he had swelling. And we were over there Wednesday night. We brought him some food. And he had swelling. Tracy goes, take him to the hospital. And he said, nah. He goes, I'm okay. He just had short of breath and everything. So, Thursday, well, he told me Wednesday. He goes, hey, I got an eye doctor appointment Thursday. Would you take me? I said, sure, because I had the eye died and everything, you know. So we did that. And so I said, hey, what do you think? He goes, yeah. He goes, go ahead and take me to Sunnyvale, you know, over there. So drove him, put him, and he got out yesterday. They got a follow-up. He's got something that making the fluid build up, and he was having a hard time.
Are we on? There we are. Do we have any visits this morning? What? Don't have any this morning. Okay. I'm off for today. All right. It's a little past 9. We'll go ahead and get started. Can you get a handle on that student? Been trying a long time, still hasn't worked, has it? All right, before we get started, as is our custom, let's, if we have anybody we need to pray for this morning, please let me know, and we will pray for them this morning. Yes.
Randy and Teresa's got some real issues with their health. Randy was in the hospital Thursday, got out yesterday with some heart problems, and Teresa's got a chronic kidney disease.
Yeah.
She's been battling that for a while.
Right.
She went to the hospital Thursday and didn't stay. Anyway,
So Randy and Teresa are both having problems this morning, so
trying to take care of Teresa.
that's hard. Okay. So we're going to pray for Randy and Teresa this morning. Teresa's been ongoing, but Randy's having some health issues right now, so we need, with his heart. Okay. Okay. All right, who else?
Danny wanted me to tell you that Judy Chandler was able to come home from the hospital.
Okay, Judy Chandler was able to come home. Okay. But she had some pneumonia, I believe, right? Okay. And of course, we need to remember Catherine. She had a surgery on Monday, went well. We need to remember her. Okay. I noticed in the bulletin we got April Brown. She had some testing, I think. How's she doing? Anybody heard how she's doing yet? Okay, we're going to pray for April this morning as well. Desiree, she came in, is that Wednesday night? I guess it was Wednesday night. She came forward and she appreciates our prayers. And also Michelle Morgan. We'll pray for her as well again. Okay, anybody else? Okay, before we get started, let's have sorry, Larry.
Pray for my daughter. She's going in Wednesday to have surgery. There is like a 99% chance it's ovarian cancer.
Oh boy, okay.
They're not going to do a biopsy. The doctors suggested go ahead and do this, and they're going to just take out part of it and take
Okay. Larry's daughter, first name, Leanne, that's what I thought. Okay, Leanne. High percentage chance it's ovarian cancer, but we want to keep her in our prayers. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, let us pray together. Dear Heavenly Father, we are thankful for this beautiful day. We're thankful that you have allowed us to come and gather in your name today, and we're thankful for the opportunity to study your word this morning. In a special way, we'd ask that you be with our members that are facing difficulties of life and circumstance and health. We're thankful that you hear our prayers and you answer our prayers. And we'd ask that you be providentially with each one of these that we've mentioned this morning. May they recover soon. May all things be done that are best for them. We'd ask in a special way be with Randy, be with Teresa. We'd ask you to be with Larry's daughter, Leanne, as she's facing some difficult challenges at this time. We're thankful that Judy was able to come home, and we ask that you continue to be with her, that she recover and continue to recover. We're thankful that Catherine has done well in her surgery. We know that was a stressful time for her, and as she continues to recover, may you be with her. Be with April as she undergoes testing, and may things be done that are best for her. Special way, we'd ask you to also be with Desiree Mitchell as she has faced many difficulties in the last year or so, and we ask that you bless her with strength and courage to do and to live as you would have her to do. We'd ask you to be with Michelle as she's facing difficulties as well. Be with her as she deals with family issues and things that are important to her, that they might go well. We're thankful for each member here at this congregation, and we'd ask you to bless us all in the things that we deal with on a daily basis. May our hearts be strong and our courage be strong, that we might seek your will in all that we do. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Okay. I'm going to get my stuff pulled up here. We're going to continue talking about worship. And of course, there's not much that would be more important to discuss in our daily lives than worship, but we're talking not worship necessarily on a daily basis as we go about our daily lives, which is also important, but we've been talking about our public worship. And we're going to look today, we finished up, I think, on prayer pretty well. We've been discussing that for a while. I'm going to see how quickly we can get through it. I've only got like 3 more weeks to go. So I'm gonna try to finish up things today, not today, but in the next 3 weeks. But today we're going to talk about the Lord's Supper. And why is it important? We'll discuss this, and I want some input on, I'm going to be asking you in just a little bit, what are things that you do, and I'm asking for tips, that you might have to help you in your participation in the Lord's Supper. And it's important that we participate in the Lord's Supper in it. Now, we're not talking about just participating as far as taking part of the bread and the cup, but we're talking about participating in what way? Right here, right? We need to have our minds engaged in what we're doing. Now, I want to ask a question. When we rank the acts of worship, we consider 5 acts of worship. We've talked about prayer, we've talked about singing, we're going to talk about the Lord's Supper, we're going to talk about giving, we're going to talk about study. When you rank those, how do you rank those in matter of importance? Now, in a class like this, I'm sure the answer is going to be, well, they're all the same importance, right? Aren't they? But in reality, do we feel that way? In reality, we need to come together on the first day of the week and participate in each act of worship. And go ahead, Larry.
What I put the Lord's Supper first because that's the only one that is actually commanded to do. It's commanded to do on the first day of the week to break bread.
We are to do that, but we're also commanded to give on the first day of the week. Specifically. Right. And I understand what you're saying, but giving is used in the same context as the Lord's Supper. But I know what you're saying, though. It is a very specific thing. But giving, the same language used, and we're going to get into that when we start talking about giving, that on the same way on the first day of the week, we're to lay by in store as well. And the same language is used there. But the Lord's Supper is a very important part of worship. But when we think about, go ahead, Steve.
Without the death, burial, and resurrection of our Lord, everything we do here is nothing.
That's right.
That needs to be the focus, because without His resurrection, His death didn't even matter. But the resurrection of the life and never to die again, that should be our focus every time.
As Steve said, the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ is so important because without that, nothing else matters, does it? But in reality, the 5 acts of worship should be engaged in with equal importance.
They're all by example.
If they're not explicit, they are by example of what the early Christians did, and the Bible is there in its totality to teach us what we're to do on the first day of the week. So the problem is, and I agree with what y'all are saying in what you're talking about, but what does that sometimes, when we think about the Lord's Supper, what does that sometimes lead to? If we categorize acts of worship, what can that lead to? What problem could that lead to? Okay. The problem is that when we say the Lord's Supper being very important, is super important, but when we say the Lord's Supper is more than worshiping God in song, I don't have to show up to sing or anything else. I can show up, come in the back door, sit down, take the Lord's Supper, and I'm out. And that's a problem, isn't it? And we know that happens, do we not? It does happen. Because when the elders decide at some point we're going to have the Lord's Supper at the beginning of service, and then a few years later they decide, you know what, maybe we ought to do that at the back end of the service, there's an uproar because, well, you're changing things around, which is perfectly okay for an eldership to do, is to change around the order of service to what they think might work best. But there's an uproar usually because, well, if we have it early, some people will like to take it and, go eat early or whatever. And it's a problem because worship is very important in all its aspects. So the one thing about when we're talking about the Lord's Supper, we're going to talk about, we're going to read it in the context. Let's go ahead and go over in Acts chapter 20 and verse 7. And a lot of these verses we know, we've looked at them extensively in other settings. Acts chapter 20 and verse 7 says, "Now on the first day of the week when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul, ready to depart the next day, spoke to them and continued his message until midnight." That goes to the early Christians, what they were doing on the first day of the week. Now, when we think about the Lord's Supper and worship in general, why is the first day of the week, do you think God set aside the first day of the week as our day of worship versus, what was it during the old law? It was the Sabbath, which was Saturday. So why is there a change, after Christ's death, why is there a change to Sunday morning? Or Sunday morning. Sunday, not Sunday morning. The new covenant changed things, didn't it? And what happened on the first day of the week? Christ rose, didn't he? He was killed and murdered on Friday. He rose on Sunday. Sunday morning is a sacred day, isn't it? I mean, it's a day set aside by God to say, you need to come together and remember me in the Lord's Supper, but you need to come together and be thankful and worship me as I intended you to do. The act of taking the Lord's Supper is not, we've used this term before, some people think, well, I'll take the Lord's Supper and get my ticket punched for today, this month, right, or this week. Well, that's not how it works, is it? There's a heart problem there if that's the issue. If you're just coming to take the Lord's Supper and then you're out the door without trying to engage in any of the other wonderful things that God expects us to do, there's a heart problem, isn't there? So it is important for us to take the Lord's Supper, and our example is on the first day of the week. Now let's look over at 1 Corinthians chapter 11.
While we were there, that's exactly the issue that Christ addressed to the Pharisees, going through the motions and not really applying themselves in their heart and mind to what was going on.
Exactly. So this was an issue with the Pharisees that they weren't engaging their mind in what they're. It's kind of the same thing we talked about during the prayer wheel. The prayer wheel we talk about in a lot of temples. You spin the prayer wheel and the prayer goes up, in their idea. Well, it's kind of becomes the same idea, is that, okay, I'm coming to take the Lord's Supper as long as I put this piece of, cracker in my mouth and take this juice, so I'm good for the week. That's not how it works, is it? The mind should be engaged in what's going on, and it always should be engaged each time. Now, when we get in here in a minute, we're going to talk about tips. How do you prepare your mind for the Lord's Supper? We're going to talk about that in just a minute if anybody has any insight. But let's look at 1 Corinthians chapter 11 in verse 23. It says, "For I received from the Lord that which I also delivered to you, that the Lord Jesus, on the same night in which he was betrayed, took bread. When he had given thanks, he broke it and said, 'Take, eat, this is my body, which is broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me.'" Now, that's what's on the front of our communion table. This do in remembrance of me. And that's very important to engage. It's not this do, once a week. Just make sure you take it. And the idea is what? The big word is remembrance, isn't it? It's a memorial. And we spend huge amounts of money in the United States and around the world to put up things that remind us of things, don't we? Of events. And the amount of money spent on monuments, and some of them are just wonderful to go see. Why are those monuments so neat to go see? If you go on a history trip and you love history, and you go to the wall, the Vietnam War Memorial, the wall, how engaging is that to walk along a wall and to see, especially if you knew anybody, right? If you knew somebody that was on that wall, it means a lot, doesn't it? Because you walk along and see maybe one of your companions or something on that wall. I think about over in Kaufman, there's a World War II memorial over there. And my uncle was not killed in World War II, but he served in World War II. And it's kind of has a special place for me because his name is there because he served in World War II. He was terribly wounded and those kind of things. But I remember hearing that as a kid, what he went through. So it means something to me to say, I know somebody that fought there, may have died there, a lot of people. So we spend all this money for these, elaborate monuments. Some of them are very simple and some of them are very elaborate, but it's there to say, remember what people did for you. Remember what people have gone through to protect the country, to serve the country. And it is an important thing. Now, when you get into the Bible and you say, okay, the Lord's Supper is, in contrast, what is the Lord's Supper? As far as grandiose or it's very simple, isn't it? It's deceptively simple, isn't it? Because we're sitting here in a quiet building and there's nothing crazy going on. There's no brutal, the things that it basically betrays the actual underneath thing, right? The same way the monuments, when you see a monument with 50 or 80,000 men on it, it's very quiet, and you're thinking about, oh, there's, these men died for us. But what does that? It just kind of masks the brutality of it, doesn't it? The men on the wall or the men on a monument or whatever were brutally killed in many cases for their country, and here it's just a quiet place to think about it. Now, the same thing with the Lord's Supper. We're sitting here in a quiet place reflecting on something that was about as brutal, probably as brutal as anything you can think of. And so we got to keep that in mind, that make sure we're thinking about it properly. Think about the incredible amount of pain that he went through as we're sitting here quietly. And when we're sitting here quietly, it's real easy for our minds to drift, isn't it? I mean, our minds run 90 miles an hour all the time, most part. So it's real easy for us to lose focus and not remember him correctly. But he says there, this is my body which is broken for you, this do in remembrance of me. In the same manner he also took the cup after supper, saying, this cup is the new covenant in my blood, this do as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. So we've got to make sure that we're putting the big picture in our thoughts, so to speak. It says, as far as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death till he comes. Therefore, whoever eats this bread and drinks this cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of the body and blood of the Lord. But let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of the bread and drink the cup. For he who eats and drinks in an unworthy manner eats and drinks judgment to himself, not discerning the Lord's body. So we got to be careful, because we're going to be guilty of that if we're not taking it correctly and thinking correctly. So the ramifications of not correctly thinking about it is damnation and judgment, is it not, Treon?
They get off track. They use analogies that just completely, in my mind, doesn't help me focus on what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I would like for that to be really considered when people do that. And I like to get up and do a Devo, and sometimes it's just totally different, and it just makes my mind, they're not talking about what we're supposed to be doing, or just reading scriptures, and it makes my mind wander, and I have a problem with that sometimes.
And I can appreciate what Treon's saying is sometimes when an individual, one of the men are coming up and doing a talk over the Lord's Supper, sometimes it comes at it from different angles than what we maybe should be thinking about. And I understand what you're saying, and that needs to be considered when men are getting up to do that talk, is that think about what you're doing. It is very important. Now, I will say this, that every man that gets up here and says something is doing the best they can, or they're putting a lot of thought into what they're doing, and they're trying their best to focus our hearts and our minds on what we're about to do. And I know what you're saying. It can be, different men. We're all individuals, aren't we? And I would say that every man that comes up here is trying to do their best to do what they're required to do. And there is a lot of pressure. If you've ever done it before, you know there's a lot of pressure in putting together thoughts that are important and that want and try to focus our minds where they should be. And they don't want to, I think there's a pressure to say something different than what the other man has said. And sometimes we don't have to do that. Sometimes it's important, you know, and there's many times that I've heard a man say something and I was like, I never thought of that. Never thought of it that way. And there's a pressure on these men to do things and say things that prick the heart and the mind and make us think in new ways and different ways. Sometimes it may go too far, sometimes not. But we've got to, I'd ask that everyone give them that leeway a little bit to say they're doing the best they can. And there's a lot of prayer. It's just like public prayer. We've talked about, you know, getting up in front of everybody and saying a prayer. There's a lot of pressure because you're leading the minds of the congregation in prayer. The same thing goes with the comments at the Lord's table, is that you're leading the minds of everybody here in some thought. And you want it to be good. You've put a lot of thought into it. You're trying to do the best you can. And it's just like sermons, you know. Sometimes Marco's sermons are just, you know, I'm just kidding. But I would say even Marco would say that some of his sermons are home runs, okay? And some of them might be a bunt, right? Okay? And I'm not throwing Marco. This would, if you've sat through 10 sermons from the same man, you're going like, that one struck a chord with me. These 5 struck a chord, these 3 not so much, and these 2 here, I didn't get anything out of that, right? But that's human nature, isn't it? And I'll say that there's 5 sermons that I get something out of that someone else might get nothing, and it reverses on who's listening to the sermon, right? I've sat through sermons and in years past, and I was like, man, I couldn't get with that one or something. And Janine goes, that's one of the best ones I ever heard. I mean, if y'all had, as spouses, don't you, or friends, and you say, that just didn't connect with me, and the next one is like, man, that was, next person says, that was the greatest sermon I've ever heard. Because it comes from where we're coming from a lot of times, doesn't it? And it's just like songs that we sing. Some songs will make us very emotional because of what we're thinking about at the time versus what's going on in life. Like this morning, I was listening to a song on my phone as I was getting ready for worship, Let the Lower Lights Be Burning. And I remember Gene Edmonds talking about that. That for some reason just stuck in my head. He was talking about what that meant and why that was written that way. Talking about the lighthouse, you know, Christ being the lighthouse, but we're the lower lights. And that just really means a lot to me, that song. So those things mean things to us in a lot of ways, depending on where we're coming from. Right.
But I do know that doing the same thing every single time weakens the message and weakens the impact. And so we all try to help push ourselves forward, and it's not always a success. I mean, same thing from the pulpit. You know, we don't want to do the same thing every time because it becomes ineffective over the duration. You know, it's always a struggle to both focus and center ourselves and hopefully help other people at the same time.
And the point he's saying is that sometimes we use certain phrases. A lot of it's in our prayers and the things we say. And then we talked about that during prayer. Sometimes we use the same phrases, and that's okay to a certain extent, but we need to make sure we're not using vain repetition. And sometimes we get into that and we just keep doing the same things over and over again. And I think that's the pressure on a lot of our men, is to say something new and different, because you want to be fresh and you want to be another aspect of it. And sometimes that's not necessarily needed. Sometimes but the deal is that we are, a lot of the problem is that we need to make sure we're where we need to be. Regardless of the gentleman who's doing the talk or the gentleman in the pulpit or whatever's going on, we've got to fly the plane, as I mentioned before, and we've got to make sure that we're engaging. Treon.
I mean, I don't have to, personally, I don't have to have somebody up there talking to get me in the right frame of mind. You know, it's not like hearing a sermon. It's, I can put my own self in that mind unless they start throwing stuff out there that gets my mind off of it. I mean, to me, this is just totally different than saying a prayer or giving a lesson. It's just.
And I understand that. And the deal is, though, if we think about, and it is different than a lesson, and it shouldn't, take away from what's being done. However, Christ gave a little lesson before he did it. And it was now I don't know if we know everything he said, but I think we probably do. It was very concise, very, quick, something simple. But he did explain, and sometimes I think we've got to remember that there's always somebody coming in that doesn't know why y'all do that every Sunday. And it's an opportunity sometimes to focus their minds maybe. And the deal is that if something is distracting to you, what we need to try to get rid of that distraction as far as in our minds go. Because there's so many, and we're going to talk about this hopefully the last week before I close out, but we've got to focus our minds regardless of what's going on around us, and that's what's hard, isn't it?
So two things. One is, the Lord's Supper is a memorial. And at a memorial, the idea is to come to an understanding or focus on the price that had to be paid for the freedom we now enjoy. I mean, that's the common thing, especially with the Lord's Supper. We enjoy a lot of freedoms because of that sacrifice that he made. So really all that we do should be that should be our focus. But you're right in that it is also a time to educate young Christians and people who are taking the Lord's Supper. Why do we do this every week? What does it mean? What happens when we don't partake of it in the right way? I mean, those are all things I think are very appropriate to those comments. But the second thing is, and I think sometimes we don't do this as well as we should, is to leave a little bit of time after the comments, because people are taking the Lord's Supper and they're trying to focus their mind on what they're doing, and then before you know it, it's the next prayer. Before you know it, it's the week.
Right.
And so sometimes it may be a little uncomfortable, but to leave, at least 30 seconds to a minute, in there, a good pause for people just to take a moment and really think about what they're doing.
It is a memorial. And a memorial, when you said memorial, his point is a memorial is set there for a reason and why we're talking about what we're supposed to be focused on and stuff. And it is a teaching moment. But I was thinking about when you said the memorial, y'all know the Gettysburg Address, right? Well, the Gettysburg Address was given by Abraham Lincoln. And if you remember the story behind the Gettysburg Address, there was a guy who stood up before the president and gave, I don't remember how long the speech was. It was an hour and a half. I mean, he just went on and on and on and on. And Abraham Lincoln gets up and he wrote a little speech on a napkin, so to speak, or a little piece of paper or whatever. He gets up, and how long is the Gettysburg Address? How long? I don't think it's even but 2 or 3 minutes long, probably, is it? And what speech had the most impact was obviously Abraham Lincoln's. I don't even remember who the guy was before him, and I don't remember a thing he said, but we know the Gettysburg Address, don't we? 80 and, you know the thing. Glad some of y'all got that. But, you know, the deal is with the Gettysburg Address is that it has impact. It's not necessarily how much we say, it's what we're saying when we say it. And it's important. And what Treon is bringing up is something that, and I'm going to talk about this on the last lesson. When we think, we're going to talk about distractions in worship. And I hope we get into things like this. I mean, personal things that this is distracting to me in worship. And and this is uncomfortable a little bit for me, but when we talk, if we're in a class like this and we say, this is uncomfortable for me, and somebody says something and says, that's uncomfortable, how should I reflect on that? I should say, am I doing that? Right? And we're going to talk about this in depth, but I'd like input, and like I say, these are uncomfortable things, but these are things that need to be addressed, don't they, in worship? So if I'm doing something, I may be doing something that I have no clue that I'm distracting somebody. And sometimes it just sends our teeth on edge when somebody does something. I'll use this example. Kids getting up and out of services dozens of times. Okay? That's distracting, isn't it? It's not that distracting to me since I've had kids and I know what's going on, and but to some people that is very distracting. So if I know that's distracting to someone, it might cause me to say, I'm going to try to keep that to a minimum. So that's for things that we need to think about in worship. And that's the reason we're going to discuss it, because, like I say, there may be something I don't even know I'm doing, and I'm distracting somebody from worship. And we got to be careful on what we do during worship. Good, really good comments. Yes, Mom. Good point. We are, God is the audience, isn't He? We are the participants. So therefore, we've got to keep ourselves focused, whatever's going on. That's right. Getting something out of the sermon or out of the service is our responsibility, isn't it? That is for us. God knows us, but that's for us. But we will get into this more as we go. But I want us to think about that, and I'm going to move quickly now. Like I say, because the Lord's Supper, and I'm going to go back to our men who evaluate and who talk about the Lord's Supper. There's so many good ideas in some of those talks, and those are things to be taken in and used for ourselves. Take what we can, and don't be distracted by the other. Does that sound? I mean, that's the best way we can do it. And again, us men, as we get up here to take that, maybe we should think about, make sure what we're saying is appropriate. That makes sense? It's the same way with prayers. In public prayer, we need to make sure what we're praying about is appropriate and, spot on what we need to be doing. And the deal is, we're imperfect men, and each one of us has a different style and a different way we speak and a different way we talk and the different things that are important to us in public prayer. We have to give other men a little leeway on their style. Does that make sense? We can't we don't want to be overcritical of someone who prays in a certain way. It's part of growing sometimes too, isn't it? So, and our young men, they're growing and their prayers are getting better, and whatever encouragement we can give to a young man, encourage them in the ways you think their prayers are good, and maybe nicely correct in other ways. We can harm somebody by being overly critical. So we keep that in mind as we deal with our young men. Now we're going to move, and I don't mean to give the Lord's Supper short shrift, but we think a lot about the Lord's Supper, and it's an individual thing. We're going to talk about giving, and I'm having to do this because I'm running out of time as far as weeks go. So giving, we're going to talk about giving. Now giving is just as the Lord's Supper is a very personal thing, giving is a very personal thing as well, isn't it? Because we're all in different circumstances. In this congregation, we have members who have good funds. We have members that are very short on funds. Is that not correct? And then that would be that way with any congregation, and it would be that way from the first century, wouldn't it? Because the Bible doesn't tell us to give a certain dollar amount. It doesn't say to give, a certain percentage even in the New Testament. It had some of those stipulations in the Old Testament, but those stipulations are not on us. But we are encouraged to give, as we're going to read it here in a minute, but how are we supposed to give? As we are prospered, right? Doesn't mean let's give more so we can get more. What is that called? A lot of the televangelists, they do this. What's that gospel called? Or that, what's the word? The what? A lie, usually. I think the term is prosperity gospel, isn't it? Or something like that. And the idea is if you listen to a televangelist very often, they'll say, hey, you give, and you give, and what's going to happen? You're going to get. Okay? You just got to give a lot, and you will receive a lot. Now, that is a biblical principle, isn't it? We're going to look at that. That is a biblical principle, but are we giving in order to receive? Where is that? It's just like every other act of worship. Where's the rubber meet the road? In what's in here, right? Why? What is our purpose for giving? Why are we giving? What's behind it when we give? And that's very important. That giving is important to the work of the church, and it's important for our growth as a Christian, isn't it? Because if you think about, we're going to talk about, the Bible talks about giving cheerfully, and you think about, I had a note here, kind of like a kid. Have you ever, the men who've passed the trays around stuff, you ever seen there's 2 or 3 different kinds of kids, aren't they, that are giving their money. It's almost like a microcosm of how we give, isn't it? But the kid, it's out there for everybody to see with a kid. When you're passing the tray and the parents are giving them $1, and they're going, when a kid gets old enough to know what that dollar is, they're going, no. And the parents, put it in the tray. Right? Have y'all ever seen that, the men passing the tray? You've seen the kid, I don't want to give it. I don't want to give it because I know what it's worth. It's worth something. So, and then there's other kids that throw it in there. Yeah, here's the plate, put the money in. And the deal is we should be kind of like that cheerful child, shouldn't we? If we're able to give happily, right? Say, I'm here to give, and I want to give some back. Yes.
Sometime more like there used to be a cartoon that was called Quincy, and Quincy's mother, he's a little guy. Quincy's mother had given him a quarter for the ice cream shop and a quarter for the collection plate at church because he's on his way to church. And he's sitting there flipping this. He's walking home, he's flipping this, and falls down the drain. And he looks up and says, "Sorry, God."
Scott's bringing up a cartoon where the kids were given a quarter to give to the church and a quarter for ice cream. And he's walking down the street and he's throwing his quarter up and he drops the quarter down the drain accidentally. And he just, okay, God, I'm sorry, I lost your quarter, right? So what does that mean? I'm taking this other quarter because I'm going to get me some ice cream, right? And don't we treat our contribution something like that, don't we? We go, oh, well, it's tough this week. God, I'm sorry, I ain't going to give you anything. He's saying felt in the bottom of the deal so when the quarters and stuff go in, it doesn't ding ding and make it and embarrass somebody, right? That is true. But don't we need to be generous in our giving? And we're going to read Psalms 23 right here. Everybody turn to Psalms 23. And the question we want to ask is, why do I want to give anything to God? And this isn't usually read or referenced to, I don't think, as far as giving goes. But I think if you have trouble giving, this might be a good, well-read, I should say, psalm, the Psalm of David. And if you can read this and say, this, I should feel the same way. And why do I want to give God a nickel, a dime, or $100 or $10,000? I don't, why should I give him anything? Well, you go to the 23rd Psalm and you read, let's read it together. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He's our shepherd, He's our guide. I don't need anything. He's given me what I need. Now, we get hung up on what we need and what we want, don't we? He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. What is that? Peace, right? Without God, there is no peace. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake. He's restored us, hasn't He? Why do I want to give? He's restored us. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Does that not put giving in proper context? If we can read that and say, the Lord is our guide, He's redeemed us, He gives us so much our cup's running over. I made a statement one time at work. I was so busy at work. And the last few years have been real busy in the construction industry. I was so busy, I said, my cup's running over so much it's getting on my shoes, And I kind of, I was like, I got so much going on. I'm so blessed that it's getting all over me, right? And aren't we all really, shouldn't we all feel that way? God has blessed us so, and yet when we go to give to God, we have to really think hard about it. And it's important that we give in that manner, with that attitude.
Jesus says it's better to give, or less to give than to receive. And so the question becomes, do we really believe that? Do we really believe that it's more blessed to give than to receive? And do we have the capacity? Because, we have to think about how those funds are used. They're used in the mission field to bring others to Christ. It's used, for people in need and things like that. So we really have compassion on our fellow man. So there's a lot of uses for that. We really consider the things that it's used for and want and need to support that.
And Matt brings up the main point. It's more blessed to give than to receive. And do we believe that? Do we believe that and what does that mean? It's more blessed. It makes us happier if we can give than if we can get. And you almost have to be an adult to figure that out after a while. When your kids are little and you start buying Christmas and, oh man, my son will love this, let's get this. And you're going like, it's a little expensive, but we're going to get it because we know he's going to love that. And when you're a kid, it's about what? Christmas morning is about, man, look, I wanted this and I didn't get it. I hear stories about when I was a kid and one of our friends or kinfolk came over and he had a little toy train. And my brother was 4 years older than me. He told the story that I was so mad that I was going to take that kid's train, because I didn't get a train and I wanted a train. And don't we think that getting something is very important, and it is, and we're blessed. But giving is what, if you really think about it, giving as you get older, giving is what makes us happy, isn't it? So giving to others, and it should be the same with us giving to the church and giving to the work of the church. And it's important that we do that. Now we're out of time, so we're going to take up here, we're going to talk about giving not to be seen. We'll talk a little bit about that next week, supporting the weak, and what is our purpose, how should we give as we continue to talk about that and to give cheerfully. So, and we're going to talk about honoring God with our giving versus dishonoring God with our giving. So we'll take up there next week. I appreciate everybody's comments today.